fellow works, he always works. Some always follow.
Yes, sir.
I cannot repeat this too often.
Is one of my three masters.
Fellow works, he always
He's black and
works.
disky like the muzzle of a
Some
gun.
always follow.
Pablo was a
I cannot repeat this too often.
Before the Cellini, Pablo was definitely before the Cellini.
Jason, welcome. We've known each other a long time, and though our musical tastes may diverge over this and that, we bond over many things. Richard Rodgers, Leonard Bernstein, both of whom we've built shows around, live shows, the Tchaikovsky ballets. And I think it's definitely fair to say we have an irrational adoration of Bacharach and David's Lost Horizon and Rodgers and Hammerstein's Flower Drum Song.
Yes.
You are also the man who introduced me to the campest song ever written, the dressing song.
Oh, from the 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T, yes.
Absolutely. I, if anybody hasn't seen your YouTube video of it, then they haven't
Then beware,
lived.
yes.
I mean, that to me must be right up there in kind of encapsulating where your musical enthusiasms lie. Am I right?
Well, I mean, it's interesting in that it's composed by Frederick Hollander, Marlene Dietrich's Blue Angel composer. The lyrics by Dr. Seuss. You know, it's this fantasy film, crazy fantasy film. And it was originally performed by Hans Conried, who starred in Can-Can for Cole Porter and 70 Girls 70 for Kander and Ebb, and was this eccentric character actor. And when I've looked for material for myself to do in cabaret, I've generally looked for kind of those old eccentric character actors for material.
And you're an encyclopedia of that era anyway, the golden age of Hollywood and Broadway, and there are certainly things that you've made reference to that I've checked out. I'm assuming that a lot of people think that during this period of lockdown that people like you will have been writing, because it's one of the things that drives you and one of the things you're most... has that been true or not?
Not quite, really. I mean, I wish it were truer, because I do sort of first and foremost probably think of myself as a composer, but you know, writing musicals, in some ways it's only seems to get harder as the years go by, sort of to actually get anything onto the stage. The sort of years and years of workshops and things that now seem to be necessary in order not to get produced, you know.
Yes.
So embarking on writing any show is a big commitment, and you need collaborators who ideally you get together with in person, but ideally you need a commission. But it's hard also at the moment to imagine what stories the world is going to want when we reopen the theatres and things. So it's felt like a bit of an impossible thing to start, to sort of commit to. So this is partly why, when you refer to me making my videos, I sang Happy Birthday on March the 19th to my mother and Maria Friedman on a little Facebook video, and then people said, oh, give us a bit more music, and I made a video the next day, and I think I've now done 65 of these funny little videos of me just sort of playing things I'm enthusiastic about and chatting about why I like them, and
with an appropriate poster in the background.
If I can, yes. I think something on the wall.
I was very excited, by the way, to see today that you've found a copy of the score for the Duenna, because of course this was Patricia Routledge's West End debut. In that Julian Slade, yes.
I hadn't realised that. I mean, I'm planning, and touch wood, I've just heard the Crazy Cocks at Brasserie Zadel. They're going to try to start doing, I believe, socially distanced performances in September, and I'm booked to do an evening of Julian Slade and Sandy Wilson with Gary Urshan and Elena Ferrari, but I've been waiting to have it confirmed, but wonderful. I feel a bit nervous to say it, but hopefully we'll be performing in September, which feels like something amazingly exciting.
Well, you know, Alex Fane has certainly trying to be innovative in introducing slowly but surely and finding venues that they can socially distance.
Right. I mean, I don't know if
performers
this
and
means.
audience.
I don't know if this means that we're going to be behind plastic or screens. I hope not. I'm waiting to hear more. But that's today's news. So.
That is quite exciting. Incidentally, you mentioned Sandy Wilson and
Yes.
and Julian Slade. Do you know I once had them together on my radio show, Stage and Screen, and that was one of the most eventful 2 hours I've ever spent.
I think we're going to have a conversation after
Yes.
this conversation.
Yes, absolutely. So you've been doing some work, I gather, for
Yes.
Book Music and Lyrics, BML.
Yes, it's a marvellous organisation, really. It's based on the BMI workshop in New York, which was set up by conductor Lehman Engel. To
Maury
help
Yeston.
help nurture new writers. And I think Ahrens and Flaherty came through there as well. And we've been doing it for sort of 10 years in London. I actually went in the first year just as a sort of relief, kind of, a locum, if you like,
Yes.
a workshop leader. And I thought, if I don't like this, if people are resistant to, suggestions, I don't have to go back. But they were very friendly, and then in the second year I was invited to join as one of the first year tutors. I do it with Tim Sutton, and I really enjoy working with, we have all sorts of people at all stages of their lives, a very mixed and diverse room, people from different backgrounds, people who are from more maybe pop backgrounds and don't notate music, along with sort of more conservatoire trained composers, and a real mix of people and life experience. But as the years go by, seems to be, getting more exciting. This year we've got the biggest intake we've had, I think sort of 22, and they're very sparky, and we're managing to run it on Zoom at the moment. And, I've found it very good for my own writing to have to sort of be able to justify to these people why I think doing something this way would be better than that way.
That's interesting. And I also gather that in the last week or so, Darren Clarke, another composer of musicals, one or two of which, The Wicker Husband and Benjamin Button, I was hugely impressed with, even though the musical language is not where I'm at particularly, but I was hugely impressed by them. I gather he's set up a marvellous thing, which is...
Yes, it's a new website where you can, for new UK music theatre writing, where you can download sheet music. So I've been invited to, as one of the writers, to sort of put some of my songs there for people looking for new songs for cabarets or auditions,
and a little bit of financial remuneration involved.
I guess,
as well.
yes. If people actually buy these things, absolutely,
which is great.
Yeah.
Before we talk a bit more about you as a composer, I also know you as master of medleys. You're wonderful at putting together strings of songs. Both the overtures you wrote for our shows, the Bernstein Revealed and Rodgers Revealed, were extremely clever. But I'll never forget the Act 2 opener of the show you did with Michael Ball at the Donmar.
Oh, well, that was yes. It was. I think it was even more than 10 minutes. The idea was Jonathan Buttrell's, he who directed it,
yes,
and as now famous for everybody's talking about Jamie.
Yes,
and he had this notion of doing the medley to end all medleys, and the sort of notion was that we would sort of spiral from one song to another, either one word in a lyric taking you into another lyric or an idea. And I remember we were sort of talking to Michael about this, and Michael just said, "The two of you go away and make it, and then come back and teach it to me." So Jonathan and I just gathered around my piano for 2 days, singing our heads off, laughing, kind of, and that was great fun, and it seemed to have some sort of logic, because I memorised it, and it sort of.
Oh, it did.
It
did. It had a clear narrative, and I think there was something like 27 songs.
I can't remember it, but it was crazy. It was crazy.
Unbelievable.
It was absolutely crazy, but fun.
Anyway,
yes.
It's sometimes interesting to me how a composer's own work does not necessarily chime with their, or reflect their enthusiasms. I mean, we've talked about the golden age of Hollywood and
Yes.
Broadway. Two of your shows that I particularly loved, Six Pictures of Lee Miller, which we heard a snatch of at the top of this podcast, and more recently Lockhart, the former written for Chichester, where your craft was certainly honed. What draws you to a subject, Jason? Is there a light bulb moment when an idea is presented and you think, gosh, I can stitch that one together?
Oh, it's hard to say. I mean, as I sort of said, I'm nervous embarking on something because you do want to feel like that there's something really there. In the case of Six Pictures of Lee Miller, I mean, it was incredible. My great mentor was Stephen Pimlott, who was with Ruth Mackenzie and Martin Duncan, was co-artistic director at Chichester at that time. And I was resident composer, and Edward Kemp, now director of RADA, was resident writer or dramaturg. I can't quite remember what his title was. Anyway, amazingly, the year before the show was on in 2005, the management said to us, we'd like you to write a new musical for the Minerva. You can have up to 8 actors and 5 musicians, do anything you want, go. I mean, unbelievable. I still can't quite believe it happened. And it was such a happy time. But I remember I'd been looking, for some reason, at doing something about a lady photographer, just because there was something about the kind of the slightly scientific profession meeting women that I found sort of quite interesting. And I'd been reading all sorts of books about various lady photographers, including this book, The Lives of Lee Miller, by her son, Anthony Penrose. And on Edward's wish list was, he was interested in doing something about a war correspondent or someone who, you know, one of those European wandering stories, I'm trying to think, like Chagall or something. And so sort of our Venn diagrams overlapped there. We very nearly, I have to tell you, did the Symposium.
Yeah.
we think about that, but we just couldn't kind of quite crack it. But it's hard to know. I mean, I remember with Stephen Pimlott, I did 17 plays with him and writing incidental music. And, you know, it's not the same as being an author, but I would sort of go, if he'd ring me up and say, do you want to do this? I'd say, I'll go on any journey with you. You know, you sort of just want to collaborate with people you feel you're going to have an interesting, happy, stimulating, caring time with. And it's sort of, the subject in that instance isn't necessarily so important. But obviously, choosing a subject for a musical, you want to feel it's going to sing. But I get quite excited about, maybe I've just always been nervous of writing big romantic songs or something, but I love the idea of how do I turn this thing that doesn't seem musical into something that has to be, you know.
Well, there are so many different ways of musicalizing a narrative, and you know, which is where we get into the problematic area of what constitutes a musical and what constitutes an opera and all these. Instead of
these
just
labels that don't help us.
I know. Instead of just saying it's all music theatre, but I think of someone like Richard Taylor, and I think of Flowers for Mrs. Harris, which is glorious.
It's wonderful. Yeah, it really was wonderful.
And indeed, The Go-Between. And in both those shows, I mean, they're through composed in every sense of that phrase, but he throws in almost tantalisingly one song, standalone song in each, and you think, kind of, what's that doing there? You accept it as being part of the show, but it's almost as if he wants to subvert the idea of a book song musical, or instead of the usual format. I mean, what do you make of that? I mean, it's. I almost wanted to ask him the question: why did you put Butterfly in The Go-Between? Why did you put Rain on Me in Flowers for Mrs. Harris? Or is it just that those moments demanded a traditional song?
It's hard to know. I mean, this is where sometimes you just go with your instincts, but also I know when I'm starting a show, you're kind of nervous. I remember with Lee Miller, I walked round it and round it for ages, and that we had all these books on all these real people, on Cocteau and Picasso and Man Ray, and I was kind of going, I don't know where to start. And then I'd found this little bit of the story where this French trapeze artist had turned up in Sussex looking for a bear for her new circus act. And I sort of suddenly had a notion that I could write that, funnily enough, as a very much a pastiche sort of song. And I put my toe in the water there. And then as the show was kind of, in a way, a bit of a surrealist collage, that ended up in the show coming directly after the darkest moment of the show, when we were in Hitler's bathroom, of all places.
Yes.
And to me, there was a great excitement in kind of butting those things up against each other, and then the final scene essentially having no song in it at all, which I know confounded some people. But
no, I mean it. I loved its edginess. It did have a kind of immediacy that was. I didn't see it at Chichester. I saw it at the Royal Academy.
Rado.
Yeah, with
Jessie
Buckley.
It was such a happy experience with those students. I mean, Jessie is fantastic, and I kind of knew I'd worked with her before she went to RADA on a little night music which I'd orchestrated for the Many a Chocolate Factory, and I knew she'd be able to do Act 1 as the sort of beautiful young woman. I didn't know what she'd be like in the second act as the middle-aged, disillusioned sort of Claire Higgins part, if you like.
Yes.
And she was fantastic.
Yeah, she was.
I mean, I just, if I'm sending out anything to the universe, it's that a producer will say to her, "Jessie, what would you like to do?" And that she'll go, "Oh, I'd love to do this musical." But I don't know if she will. But
I hope she doesn't desert us for the world of movies, although she's wonderful in. Yes, she needs to do both, because she's a great stage presence as well.
Yeah.
What's happening to Lockhart? I mean, I wouldn't put Southern American Gothic and Jason Carr in the same sentence normally, but I loved it. I really did.
Funnily enough, I was approached for Lockhart by this extraordinary patron of the arts, a lady called Leela Whitkin, who wanted to commission a new musical, and she said the only thing, she wanted it to be an original musical, and she wanted it to be something to inspire people to find their own personal voices, but beyond that, she didn't, it could be anything. Now, I think I'm great when I'm given a story and some characters. I think I'm really good at sort of turning that into musical theatre, at expanding time or contracting time and all those things. But I'm not someone who dreams up story and characters. So I said, well, I'd love to take your money, but I'll only do this if I can find someone to write with. And at the time, I'd recently finished writing a show, which I can't even talk about because we don't have the rights to the underlying material, but it was a real passion project with Ashley Robinson, who's an American actor who was in Merrily.
And I saw him in Floyd Collins.
Yeah, of course you did, in Floyd Collins, yeah. And he's from South Carolina, and when I rang him to ask him whether he'd be interested in writing something with me, he was in South Carolina, and he sort of came up with this notion. I mean, he's from Lockhart, South Carolina. Our show is set in the fictional Lockhart, Georgia, which closely resembles his hometown, without hopefully getting him lynched. And yeah, I mean, he's younger than me, he's edgier than me, he's grounded in sort of country music. And so it was, it was a very different energy for me to meet. But in some ways, it's actually a really, really traditional book score, in the sort of the placement of the songs and the work they do and the way they're contrasted in sort of style, and the solos and duets and ensembles and all that. In some ways, it's a really traditional show. What's not traditional is, if to put it into the one sentence version I give to people, is when they say, "What's Lockhart about?" I say it's a redneck boy who discovers he's inherited healing abilities from his mother, who was hanged as a witch by the Ku Klux Klan, and he's then mentored by a Native American hermaphrodite.
It's a thrilling show, actually. And what impressed me particularly about it was the spectacle, if you like, of your good self writing in a different idiom, with that twang of pop and country and all those elements coming together. And it brings me to this other idea that, you know, the best musicals are those where the musical material or style most closely identifies with the subject matter. So in other words, it's not generic. So, you know, it's not what one would say, oh, that's a musical, you know, it's if you see what I mean.
Yes,
so
it's interesting, isn't it?
It put you out on a limb, I think.
Yes, I mean, I did refer to them. I said, these are my pop songs, and then a lot of people who I knew would roar with laughter. You know, say, well, they're very arty pop songs, but you know, to me they were my pop songs. But what was I?
Well, when you hear a composer like Adam Gettle, we mentioned
Yes.
Floyd Collins just now.
Yes.
You know, Floyd Collins and The Light in the Piazza could not be more different idioms or different subjects, but it's clear who the composer
It's
is.
him. It's very,
Yes,
you know,
yes.
3 seconds, and
Yeah.
you know it's Adam.
So on that note
Yes.
of colour and identification, you're a busy orchestrator, you're an extremely useful orchestrator, and you've done some, let's spin out a couple of, you know, Olivier Award-winning Sunday in the Park with George, La Cage aux Folles, both of which transferred to Broadway, Night Music, which also did, Candide, Fiddler on the Roof, West Side Story most recently, Annie Get Your Gun. Now,
Yes.
I will never forget that insanely entertaining Richard Jones staging at the Young
At
Vic.
the Young Vic. I have to say, I mean, it was
4
very
upright
challenging.
pianos.
Yes,
Yeah.
4 upright pianos.
Where did
spread
that
out
come
along the-
from? Where did
that came from Richard. Richard is, I mean, I feel a bit, even though I've only worked there once with him, I feel a bit about Richard like I did about Stephen, in that I'd sort of go and do anything with him just to go into the room, because he's as bright a person as I've ever come across, but he's also kind, you know, but fearsomely intelligent, and
Yes.
but witty as well. And you know, we were doing Annie Get Your Gun. Let's just say this clearly: this big Broadway old show at the Young Vic, you know, home of arty, edgy productions, and you know, I would go out at the. Heaven knows, I'm sorry, digressing, but I would go out at the interval during previews, and you would hear people going, "This is amazing," ringing their friends, "It's the best thing I've ever seen." But a lot of people also going, "This is appalling! This is a travesty! You know, how could they do this?" And it was, you know, we didn't know quite what people would make of it, but we didn't have budget for for much of the band.
Yeah.
I remember we talked about maybe having a couple of actor musicians, didn't go with that. And I think Richard at one point suggested to me, he said, "How about 2 pianos, 2 accordions?" At that point, I hadn't quite discovered the accordion as the secret weapon I now know that it is. So I was a bit nervous about that. And then I said, well, you know, we could have 3 pianos. And then I think because he knew visually what the show was going to look like, he said, well, if we can have 3 pianos, can we have 4? And they were, because it was this like letterbox stage, like a cinemascope.
Yes,
screen.
indeed.
And in a way, it was like a mad silent movie. And I noticed, I think some of the audience came and sort of thought, "What is this? It sounds like a rehearsal. It's just a piano." But really, it wasn't just a piano. It was 4 pianos.
Well, they were part of the design as well.
They were part of the design. I have to say, the Berlin estate, the daughters and people came, and they were very happy. You know, it was done with much love, but it's a tricky show, I would have to say, in that, I mean, they are God's own songs. There isn't a better collection of popular songs in one score. I mean, maybe South Pacific, but it's an extraordinary score. And Richard would laugh, because when we were talking about You Can't Get a Man with a Gun, I would say, this is the to be or not to be of musical comedy, you know, because it's so amazingly crafted.
Yes.
I just get passionate about it. But, you know, the book is very hard in this woke age. You know, the notion that this woman who is more skilled than the man she's in love with defers to his skill. She loses the shooting contest at the end on purpose in order to win her man. I mean, it's sort of untenable, really, from a modern perspective.
But that was so screamingly funny as well. I mean, the shooting contest was all happening off stage, and there were sort of aeroplanes involved.
We
Hilarious.
We found witty ways to deal with it, and to meet the text. as the young Vic would any classic text, putting it on, not doing any Get Your Gun like it has to behave like it's a commercial show now, which would be sort of how it's been done before. It's this big commercial title, you have to do it in a big commercial way. No, we did it as you would for the young Vic. You know, you would, if you were doing a Chekhov or a Shakespeare, you just meet the text as modern people and do it with love. And heaven knows, you know, I do love my old shows, and you know, I was absolutely there to defend the score and make it as joyous and fun and comedic as possible. But it needs wrestling to the ground.
Well, I must tell you my story of my visit to it, because I saw it at the matinee on New Year's Eve.
Gosh,
and we were waiting for the start. We were all in the auditorium, and then suddenly someone came on, the stage manager came on stage, and we have a technical hitch, and we're going to start as soon as we can. He disappeared. It was nearly 2. It was supposed to start at 2, and at 2:20. And remember, some of this audience had trains to catch to go home for their New Year's Eve parties. At 2:20, he came back on and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we still haven't solved the problem, so we're going to have an interval now, and we'll call you back in." And there was no technical problem. The technical problem was that Stephen Sondheim was in the audience with Jeremy Sanson. He was late, and he thought it was 2:30, or they thought it was 2:30.
Right.
So of course, nobody saw him come in, and I turned to the people around me and I said, "There's the technical problem right over there." I was very proud of that.
Well,
but
there aren't many people I would hold the curtain for.
Absolutely. He almost had to be carried out. He was screaming with laughter. He thought it was
well. He
so
of course
funny.
knew Dorothy Fields, who co-wrote the script, very well. She I think was a bit of an auntie to him.
Yes. Yes.
And a very similar figure in terms of her skill and her kind of technical skill mixed with a use of vernacular language. You know, I mean, I think she probably was a great inspiration to him. So
yeah.
he would have known it very well.
So when you're approached generally about doing an orchestration, they're usually reductions because they're for small theatres and small productions. And nowadays, let's face it, we're not going to get a 40-piece band, however much we might crave it. Thinking back to the...
I mean, I've once been approached to enlarge something, but I won't say what it is.
Okay.
But I mean, my rule to myself has always been, if I possibly can, I mean, unless, you know, I've nothing to eat at all, only to accept orchestration jobs when it's a score I love, because then I'm going to enjoy spending a month or so, you know, or two with it. But also, you know, if I don't love the music I'm orchestrating, Jason, composer, curls up and dies, and it's really hard, and that only gets harder as the years go by, in a way. So the show I turned down enlarging was one I just couldn't.
I see.
Couldn't get behind. But I mean, all these shows you're listing, you know, I mean, how lovely to spend, you know, going to work every day. I mean, I'm doing reorchestrating Carousel for just going to work every day, which means walking into the bedroom and sitting at the desk in my pajamas, you know, and going, "Oh, today I'm doing When the Children Are Asleep. This is the best number ever written."
Yes.
And then the next day, "Oh no, I'm doing Mr. Snow today. No, that's the best number ever written."
Yeah.
You know, and similarly, you know, when I was doing Candide, or you know, these shows are wonderful. They're very inspiring to me, and you know, to get to know them more intimately from the inside out. Yeah. I mean, spending time with West Side Story, I mean, I'd always loved it, but I would never, you know, I would always say, "Oh, I love On the Town, West Side," those kind of sappy young people. You know, I mean, I know it's a masterpiece, but you know, it wasn't my favourite.
Tell me how you approach that, because I did see that at the Royal Exchange, and I remember you saying the big challenge here in choosing which instruments I'm going to use is that it must be exciting. It must have that visceral punch. Yeah,
I mean, normally, you know, there's a budget. There's a budget for what they can afford, but there's also a physical restriction on how much space there is. So these things determine you can do. And I like to think of myself as a professional. So if they say this is the budget, I try and sort of do it within that. They got permission, I have to say, to do it with a band of, I think, 8 or 9. And I had a really good look at that score. And you know me, I don't really want a lot of synthesizers hanging around pretending to be real players.
Of course.
And I remember going for the meeting, actually, with the director and the producer and saying, look, I've had a really good look at this. I believe I can do it with a band of 11. I strongly suggest it's 11 plus a conductor, not someone nodding madly from a busy piano bar. And I have to say, the Royal Exchange, like the Young Vic, they wanted to make the art as well as they could, and they believed me, and they made it happen. And as you say, picking your lineup when you have a small band it's crucial. Everything has to earn their place. I could point to a few things. When I did Sunday in the Park with George, I had 5, I think, and I was trying to get my head round, because of the opening part, sort of horn solo, and then knowing that there'd be later.
Yes.
I was thinking I had to have a horn, and I couldn't in my head get it to blend with the rest of the ensemble. Then I went, one day I just had a eureka moment and went, hang on, what if that's on an alto sax and it sort of sounds like a French conservatoire sort of thing?
Yes.
And then suddenly I knew how to do it. And I think there was one page of colour and light when I nearly threw in the towel and went, I can't do this.
Yeah.
Similarly with West Side, I was thinking about those magnificent heart-stopping violin solos in One Hand, One Heart, dee da da da, ya da da, you know the bit.
Yes.
And I was thinking, well, I've got to have a string player to do that. But I was thinking, if I have a violinist, one violin, it's no use to me in the mambo at all. It's a waste of space.
Yeah.
Maybe I could get them to play some extra percussion, but really, do you want to trust your one violinist to do extra percussion? So don't shoot me, violinists. I thought, well, maybe I could get a violinist who can double guitar, because then I feel pretty in America, if nothing else. It would be nice to have a bit of Spanish guitar. But then again, you sort of think, am I actually not getting the best guitarist or the best violinist? Am I getting, a second division doubler? Given that it's what they have to play is so hard and exposing. And then I thought, hang on, if I have one cello, it can play all those tunes an octave lower or 2 octaves lower. And meanwhile, it's really useful to me reinforcing the bass lines in the mambo, for instance. And I always like having plenty of things in the tenor register between the voice and the bass line, things that can support the voice, that the voice can sit on, that can weave those lines in between. And otherwise, I think in working out the numbers, I remember that I was thinking about the mambo, and particularly that, ba ba boo ba ba doo ba do 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 da, and looking at how many notes and the chords were there, and thinking, okay, how many blowers do I need?
Yes.
So if I revoice, what's the minimum number of blowers I need to kind of make this happen? And I think it was 6. So I ended up with 3 wind and three brass.
So interesting hearing the thinking behind the solutions, the musical thinking behind, because there is in that score there is a visceral quality that every time every time you go into the dance at the gym, wherever I am, whatever kind of level of performance I'm watching, I always start to well up, because I just find it
it is extraordinary,
so powerful.
I'd say you can always make noise. If you have 2 trumpets and drums, you can make noise. Purcell knew that, whatever. Yeah. You can always make noise. I remember reading some lighting design, and maybe this was more in the old days. Technology has changed, but reading some lighting designer somewhere saying you needed more lamps to do dim lighting than to do bright lighting. And similarly, it's the quiet numbers that are the challenge, because when you don't have a bank of strings, it's very hard to make. How do you make something that was designed for a homogeneous, quiet texture?
Yes.
So this is sometimes where the secret weapon, the accordion, has come in. Not on West Side, but those are the challenges.
It's interesting, isn't it, with West Side, that Lenny really didn't like the expanded orchestrations for the movie because he felt you couldn't see the wood for the trees. It was just too much. I personally find it very exciting when I hear those arrangements for the movie. They're thrilling, but he wanted something leaner and more direct and edgier. And
I mean, Sarah Frankham, our director at Manchester, when she heard our band, she was thrilled, but she kind of, for her, she said, I suppose because there weren't the strings, maybe she found it sounded a bit darker and a bit more sort of Kurt Weill, sort of cabaret band, which would make sense. You know, I think we were big enough still to be able to do all the counterpoints and to satisfy. And,
you were.
And again, just all praise due to a fantastic sound designer, Richard Brooker, and team. So I was very nervous because they put them all, as you know, remotely outside the theatre, because the theatre's this weird booth, and I was very nervous about having no live sound at all, because that's so against
everything
I stand for. But they did an amazing job, and I knew from the first time we did a sound check, I went, oh, it's going to be fine. Let them do their jobs. Don't give them any notes. Let them get on with it.
Yeah. No, terrific stuff.
It's
really,
we are collaborative.
And of course, you were in the middle of preparing for the rerun.
Yes.
When all this dreadfulness.
Yes, we did
descended.
2 days. We did 2 days. We had them a largely new cast. I have to say, we had the same Tony and Maria coming back, but a largely new cast. And I have to say, some really exciting young performers. One of the great things about auditioning this show was just I got to meet a lot of new performers who I would never normally meet in the run of what I do, which tends to be accompanying older singers, shall we say. So to meet all these exciting young performers was great. And, we were all just desperate to do it because it's such an extraordinary piece.
It really is.
It was a terrific production. I mean, we still hope we might do it, but obviously.
All these things are just put on hold. I won't dwell on the fears of the last 3 months and the future.
I don't have a crystal ball.
No. But I know that for you and me, we when we hear live music for the first time after this dreadful hiatus.
I'm going to be a gibbering wreck.
Me too.
I mean, I think when the first time I hear a live orchestra, I'm going to be a wreck. I think I'm going to be a wreck the first time I go into a rehearsal room, with a bunch of actors, and I think just look at each other. I mean, I think we're going to spend most of next year in tears, actually.
Well,
hopefully in a good way.
Yes, I know. I mean, one of the last. It does all seem longer than it has been. But one of the last things I heard was the Elgar Violin Concerto with Nicola Benedetti and Jurowski, which I'm going to be doing a chat with Nicola for this series of podcasts.
You took me to see her at the Proms playing the Corn Gold, and she really is
special.
The real deal,
She really is.
Let alone for the record labels, the fact that she cuts an extraordinary figure. Which should be neither here nor there, but in terms of selling something to a wider public. But
no, she's special. I have the sound of it in my head now, in my ears, and as you say, when we're able to go back into a concert hall, it's going to be extraordinary. So to finish up. Have you a proudest achievement, either as a composer or as an orchestrator? I also want to ask you, this is an impossible question, but it's fun to ask. Favourite show, favourite song.
Okay.
We did this with, of course, Rodgers and Bernstein when we did our shows, and it was very interesting. I remember with the Rodgers, my favourite song is "What's the Use of Wondering" from Carousel, and yours was "Hello Young Lovers" from King and I. And so on that basis, proudest achievement, favourite show, favourite song?
I was very, very proud of Six Pictures of Lee Miller. It was, sadly, we opened on 7/7/05, the day of the London bombings. So our press night was a very weird event. You can imagine it was half full and everyone in a very strange place, trying to give to the show, but we were, as you know, we were a show that required full concentration and things. But I felt so supported by the producers. I was very proud of our ambition, and people would ring me. I would speak to friends during rehearsals, and they'd say, "Oh God, are you having a terrible time out of putting on a new musical?" And I'd go, "No, I'm pinching myself because I had the most fabulous cast with Anna Francolini and Mark Meadows and Beverly Klein and Teddy Kempner, these fantastic people, and I just felt so supported and lucky, and it's hard to imagine I was given that opportunity now, and who knows whether it'll ever come around again. And I think I did appreciate it, and I have to say, rehearsing it, I've loved my two experiences with drama students, doing Lee Miller again at RADA and then doing Lockhart at Mountview. I just had the happiest time working with these students on my material. I felt very blessed, even though I probably earned threepence. So those were very, very happy times. Favourite shows, I'd have to give you three.
Okay.
One is The King and I. One is Gypsy, and one is Follies.
Marvellous choices.
I don't think I could be without any of those.
Marvellous choices. Yes.
And for me, Follies, I was a wreck at the National. I think that they found me at the stage door after the first preview I saw. Josephine Barstow singing One More Kiss is possibly the best 3 minutes I've ever spent in a theatre. But I just kept hugging everybody because I sort of couldn't speak for sort of 48 hours. Bless you, had Nigel Lilly on. I just didn't think it was possible to do it that well anymore.
I agree with you.
I didn't think I'd see it done, with that.
Well, like many of Sondheim shows, if you have the right actors, because, if the acting is good, then suddenly they emerge as masterpieces.
But, it's sort of in my head, because it had always been, you had all these, the sort of guest stars, if you like, rather than the main four, because, we're used to them bringing on the history with them, whether it was Ethel Shutter originally singing Broadway Baby, or my beloved Betty Garrett, who I accompanied singing it in a New York revival. These people bringing on that history with them. Well, that's not possible anymore because they're all, those generations have gone. So in a sense, though people bring their own history on with them, their own performing history, it's not that particular bit of history. And so in a way, they're acting those roles. But I thought it was thrilling, and I shook and cried, went back 3 more times. Just because you don't expect to, you love, sometimes masterpieces are just really hard to do.
And I think it could only have happened at the National Theatre.
Yeah.
It was just the resources put into it, and the quality of the whole event. You still haven't given me a favourite song before you sign off.
A favourite song? Well,
That's impossible, really.
It is impossible. In one of our shows, I think we talked about, in a slightly glib way, I say, in auditions, all boys should sing Something's Coming and all girls should sing Mr. Snow. But can I pick a favourite song? No. The Sondheim Society asked me something the other day of favourite Sondheim songs, and I think I came up with Opening Doors from Merrily We Roll Along, not actually because it's a favourite piece of music, but just because I met that in the theatre when I didn't know you could do that in 7 minutes in the theatre. It sort of blew my mind. But Hello Young Lovers, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, when I'm asked what my favourite Sondheim song is, I always say, and I really believe this, Anyone Can Whistle. And interestingly enough, I did a series of interviews for an 80th birthday podcast for Steve, and I asked most of my contributors to name a song, and Angela Lansbury said, With So Little to Be Sure Of.
Well,
now
that's the song of the hour, isn't it?
Well, 2 great songs from a show that doesn't work, but with a great score.
It doesn't work. Sorry, Steve. I've sat and watched it and gone, I know these are great songs, but this is silly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jason, we could go on for a long time, and there may be 1 or 2 people out there who want us to go on for a long time, but I think we've had quite enough for one day.
Okay.
Bless you.
Thank you.
And thanks a huge amount. Yeah.